A man tortured and murdered for just a few £100 in a quiet English village. A case with so much evidence that it surely should have been solved by now, but it hasn't. And 16 years on, the murder of Alan Wood poses many more questions than it answers. Lound is a tiny English village, about 120 miles north of London, and one of the attractions of the place, frankly, is just how little happens here. But that was to change in the early morning of the 24th of October 2009, when a man was in Lown to see his friend Alan Wood. But when he arrived at the small bungalow, he immediately felt a sense of unease when both the front and back doors were open and there was no response when he called Alan's name. He made contact with the landlord of the property and the two of them ventured inside, apprehensive of what they should find. The living room was a scene that neither man would ever forget. Alan's body was lying face down in a pool of blood, and there were huge wounds on his head and his hands had been tied with sellotape. Detectives later confirmed he'd been dead for 3 days and had suffered a brutal and sustained assault, during which he was repeatedly stabbed in the eye. He had his throat cut a number of times, and shockingly, a deep wound to the back of his neck suggested an attempted decapitation. So, just who was Alan Wood, and who would have wanted to inflict such dreadful violence on him? As the investigation into the murder began, detectives looked into his life for any clues in his life to his violent death. 50-year-old self-employed gardener, Alan Wood, lived in a small bungalow in Lound. The eldest of three children, after school he worked in the printing industry in nearby Bourne until redundancy led him to focus on what he really enjoyed, and that was gardening. He worked in a couple of places before he started his own gardening business, but the work wasn't so well paid, so he took a job in the Sainsbury's supermarket in Bourne to help top up his income, especially in the winter. And he enjoyed it. He enjoyed the company of his work colleagues on the night shift. Alan had married Joanne in 1992, but they split up 17 years later. It seemed the split was a really amicable one, and the couple still spoke even after Joanne moved away to Peterborough. Alan certainly had a full life outside work, and he really loved motorbikes and cars, owning a black Triumph Speed Triple and an E-Type Jaguar. He was a keen photographer, and good enough at it when it took real skill to be good before the tech advanced, even taking the wedding photos for some people that he knew. Alan and Joanne didn't have children, but Alan loved spending time with his nephews and his nieces. And Alan was, by all accounts, a very popular man locally and spent a lot of his time at the Willoughby Arms, his local pub. Locals spoke of how he was always there for any events and happy to help in the organising and the clearing up. He loved a lager or two, and was particularly fond of sitting at the bar of the pub with a drink, a lager, and a packet of peanuts or a mini cheddars, chatting or reading a newspaper. Everyone the police spoke to said just what a nice guy he was, and nobody could understand why anybody would want to kill him. His ex wife Joanne said, "Even though we'd separated, Alan would still come and look after my garden. He was the kind of man who would do anything for anybody." And his mum, Maureen, she couldn't understand it either. She said, Alan was friendly, placid, and wouldn't hurt a fly. The brutal murder of this gentleman has devastated his family and friends. I cannot understand why anyone would want to hurt my son. The family and his friends are stunned and shocked. And the early lead hoped for in any investigation just didn't materialise for the police. Door to door inquiries in the area and local appeals didn't turn up the leads that had been hoped for. It seemed that nobody had seen or heard anything out of the ordinary. Alan was last seen on Wednesday, the 21st of October 2009, shopping at the Morrison's supermarket in nearby Stamford. On his way home, he stopped off at the Willoughby Arms for a quick drink, leaving there around 6:30 pm. But this was the last confirmed sighting of Alan before his body was found on the Saturday morning. But there were clues left at the crime scene, giving investigators further insight into just what happened to him. Whoever had killed Alan hadn't been as careful, or maybe aware is a better word to use, than we might expect. Footprints were found at the scene that matched a pair of size 8 Converse trainers. With the help of Converse in the US, the print type was narrowed down to a particular upper, which was available in two styles and was largely sold in Europe, not so much the UK, and North America at the time. In addition, there was part of a bus ticket stuck to the sellotape that was used on Alan's hands, and this was from a local born company, Delane. Did this strongly suggest a local man? And vitally, a full DNA profile was recovered from blood at the scene which didn't match Alan's. Had the killer hurt himself as he attacked Alan, or as Alan desperately tried to fight him off? But unfortunately, despite this profile being run through a number of global DNA databases, there are no matches. Does this mean that whoever killed Alan has only ever committed this one attack? It's highly unusual for someone to progress straight to this level of violence. Or maybe they have killed or tortured before and just not left the same level of clues behind. But then came a breakthrough. On the Thursday evening at about 9 p.m., the day after Alan had last been seen, a number of attempts were made to withdraw money from Alan's bank accounts in nearby Stamford and Bourne. And further attempts were made at the Sainsbury's store where Alan worked. As you can see, a number of these attempts were captured on CCTV. And this man was also seen by witnesses, allowing a photo fit to be created. The man is described as follows by Lincolnshire police. The person appears to be 5'9 to 5'11 tall, dressed in a smart casual manner, and from the CCTV images they appear to be wearing a distinctive striped scarf. The person has an unusual walk, and experts outside of the local force have analysed the footage and come to the conclusion that he limps due to his right leg being slightly longer than his left leg. The offender may also have been injured after the crime as blood was found at the scene. This injury could be to their hand. The CCTV also shows the man smoking, and it also suggests again that the man is a local, as with the presence of the local bus ticket, as he appears to know where the CCTV is in the local area and takes precautions to avoid being captured by it, although he failed spectacularly in doing this. Once again, you have to ask, why is CCTV footage so often so rubbish, so grainy? By now, detectives had a pretty good idea of what had happened to Alan. They thought he was in bed reading on the Thursday evening when the attacker or attackers arrived at his bungalow. It seems he was then bound with sellotape and tortured for his bank details. It is thought he may have been alive when the killer first went to try the bank cards, but was then tortured further by a returning killer as Alan had given him the wrong number. Only 2 of 11 attempts had been successful. Of course, one of the killers may have stayed with him and connected with the other on mobile phone. Alan was finally killed when just £700 had been taken from his accounts, and he wasn't just killed. As we've heard already, his body was mutilated after his death, with detectives suggesting that this was possibly done for personal gratification. Robbery appeared to be the motive for Alan's murder, but of course, until the person or people responsible are caught, it's hard to say for sure. Alan's employers, Sainsbury's, put up a reward of £50,000 for anyone who can provide information which would lead to the arrest of Alan's killers. That reward still stands today. And in October 2010, it seems there was a breakthrough, as detectives carried out raids on 3 properties in the nearby Stamford area. 3 men aged 18, 35 and 43 were arrested. All were released on bail. And 2 months later, in December 2010, another man was arrested, but this person wasn't local. He was arrested in Hampshire on England's south coast. But none of these people were charged. And as is so frustrating with the UK police, we still don't know why they were arrested, what they were interviewed about, or the connections between them, if any. The case was covered twice on Crime Watch, but again, there were no charges following. Alan's home was demolished soon afterwards, so now new houses standing there. In 2014, there was a new angle. Detectives were appealed for help in finding a specific individual. Detective Superintendent Stuart Morrison, who was leading the investigation, said that officers were trying to trace a man, Pavel Virch, who may be able to help with the inquiry, although again, quite why was unclear. We never know if Pavel made contact or not, or how this progressed. And despite continuing regular appeals, it seems the investigation has reached a dead end. And as I talk to you now at the start of August 2025, nobody has faced charges for Alan's murder. So, without going too much into speculation, what else can we say about the killing? Well, there is certainly no shortage of theories. Firstly, and one that is well supported, is that this was actually a case of mistaken identity. With his heavy build and thick hair, Alan looked just like the manager of the Sainsbury's store where he worked. Combine this with the Jaguar he drove, and it suggested that his killer may have assumed that he was a very wealthy man. A friend of his, Ella Jenkins, was quoted talking about this theory. She said, "It was his pride and joy, and it looked fabulous, but it was only probably worth about £500. I saw the manager at the funeral. He was the same build and the same colouring. It was kind of at first glance, it was Alan, but he didn't have glasses. My gut feeling is that they thought he had money, or they thought he had the keys to the store." This could at least partially explain the level of violence used, as his attackers would have thought he had access to the keys to the supermarket, and so they'd have anticipated their haul as being much higher than the few £100s that was stolen from Alan. Other theories are that he was maybe a casual user of sex workers, and maybe having brought someone back to his house and giving the impression of wealth, this could have led to him being targeted by the violent men who operate in this world. There is no evidence for this, so it all seems highly unlikely. Or was this just a dispute either via his gardening business or due to something happening in another part of his life? Again, there is no evidence for this, and such a mild mannered, easygoing guy, you wouldn't think this would have happened. But as we hear so often on this channel, seemingly minor disputes can lead to high levels of violence. The other confusing aspect to this case is all the indications point to the killer or killers being local. So it'd have to be a strong chance of them being found. So just why weren't they? Is this because they were potentially only passing through the area due to working in the farming or the fruit picking businesses that take place in this area and require additional labour during the season? Maybe. At this time, the people carrying out this sort of work tended to come from Eastern Europe. So could the killer have come from here? This theory is backed up by police activity, as they did carry out a number of specific appeals in countries such as Albania, Lithuania, Slovenia, Slovakia, Russia, and Poland. And then what is the link to the Polish man who worked in the car wash? So many questions, but no answers, which is quite astonishing, I think, in such a small place and considering all the clues that were left behind. Surely this is a crime that should have been solved by now. Alan's mum lived in Stamford until her death in April 2023, aged 87. On the 10th anniversary of her son's murder in 2019, she said she did not want to go to her grave without knowing why he was killed. But unfortunately, this is yet another parent who has died without ever knowing what happened to her son. But Alan has certainly not been forgotten by those who knew and cared for him. His family and friends created a memorial garden at the Willoughby Arms to remember him, and a sundial there has a tribute to Alan using one of his favourite phrases well known to his friends in the pub. It reads, "Sadly missed by all his friends and family, I'm going after this one." Anyone with information about this case is urged to contact Lincolnshire Police on 101 or call Crime Stoppers anonymously on 0800 555 111. So there we have it. I think it's absolutely astonishing this person hasn't been caught, don't you? With all the information out there. My belief is that the police should release loads more information about these cold cases that, after all, they've failed to solve for so many years. I know not everyone agrees, but with resources tight for the police, Surely now is the time to start showing some trust and release more information, as maybe it's you watching this video who has that crucial piece of information needed to crack this case. I would strongly suggest a number of people are fully aware of what happened to Alan and who was responsible, wouldn't you? But as things stand at the moment, it seems that his family and friends will never get the answers they need and deserve unless loyalties change. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you found it of interest. If so, please do watch one of my others. Until next time, I've been Adam Lloyd.